Jai Jinendra to all our viewers, and we are going to conduct today our ninth Acharya Mahaprajna ji's birth centenary lecture. So to start with this, I just wanted to let you know that Benjamin Franklin, one of the founding fathers of USA, said, "You may delay time, but time will not. If not now, when? If later, why?" Stewarding your time and life is as powerful as you're watching this video. I am so proud that you're here and you're connected with us as our viewers. I believe that it is a true testament to your desire to be your greatest version and give your best in life, make an impact and live your purpose. You're doing it right now. You're watching this YouTube version of our webinar and you are with us today. One thing we will never get more of is time. Here is the fact: no matter how successful, powerful, famous, or rich someone is, they are still going to have the same amount of time in the day that you and I have, that is 24 hours. It's how they spend those hours each day that differentiates them from the rest of the world. One of the most valuable commodities is that we all steward our time well. What we give to is so important in how successful we will actually be when we investigate history. And that's where Acharya Mahaprajna ji, we're celebrating his 100th birth centenary. So famous people, what they have left, the legacy, and how we are propagating it, that is so important. I always imagined that their lack of time wasn't their excuse, but their drive to have more to do. Leonardo DiCaprio, he starred in 36 movies, only winning an Oscar in his latest at 41 years old. And it is mind-boggling that if he did not steward his gift well, he might have not gotten his Oscar. Sam Walton, who was the founder of Walmart, at 44 years old, one of the fastest growing massive supermarkets. Leo Goodwin founded Geico at the age of 50. Gordon Bulker founded Starbucks at the age of 51. Charles Flint founded IBM at the age of 61. The average age of the President of the United States is 55 years old, the youngest 42, and the oldest 69 years old. Pablo Picasso completed one of his masterpieces at the age of 55. I am getting so excited right now. J.R.R. Tolkien published the first volume of his fantasy series of The Lord of the Rings at the age of 62. Noah Webster completed his monumental American Dictionary of the English language at the age of 66 years old. The oldest person to climb Mount Everest was 71 years old. John Glenn went into space as the oldest person at 77 years old. I don't know if you're seeing the red thread here, but these people showed that if time was steward, you will be seen for your hard work and dedication to the dream on your life. Just wanted to say that as Jain, we adapted Jainism, and we are the propagators of Jain. So how Acharya Mahaprajna ji brought Jainism and science together. And today we are listening to his lecture series with these amazing diamonds, like I always say, who are part of our lecture series, and our viewers who have been connected with us all this time. Just wanted to let you know that we as Jains who adapted Jainism, it is our job to propagate and show the world what Jainism principles are. So with further ado, I would like to call upon Dr. Eric Larson, who's the chair of our religious department at FIU, who would introduce our honorable speaker. Dr. Larson.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Dean John Stack and the Green School of International Public Affairs and the Department of Religious Studies, it's my privilege to welcome you to this morning's lecture. In English, there's a saying about scholars who live in ivory towers. And it basically refers to the idea that in order to create knowledge, you have to seclude yourself and spend a lot of time in deep thought and consideration. But yet at the end of the day, all knowledge should have a practical effect. And I'm very happy that at FIU, our president is fully committed. He often tells us that his goal for the university is to be a leading public research institution with community engagement. And I love that in our Green School of International and Public Affairs, the motto of the school is creating a just, peaceful, and prosperous world. With these ideas, I have to tell you that we couldn't have had better partners than those in the Jain Education and Research Foundation and our wonderful Jain friends in the Jain community here in South Florida and all around the country. We're so happy to partner with you all to learn and study more about this wonderful Jain tradition, but also to make changes. And I see those changes in our students as they take classes on Jainism and learn and think about the kind of people that they want to become. And so I'm very happy also for this lecture series to highlight some of the ways that Jainism interacts with the world in which we live, with modern science, and with a practical effect. So this morning we have a very great treat in store for us. We are very pleased to welcome Professor Gary Francione, who is Board of Governors Distinguished Professor of Law and Nicholas Katzenbach Scholar of Law and Philosophy at Rutgers University. He served as a law clerk to Justice Sandra Day O'Connor of the United States Supreme Court, and he practiced law before entering teaching in 1984. Professor Francione is the author of numerous books and articles on animal rights theory and veganism. He himself has been a vegan for 38 years based on his acceptance of the principle of ahimsa or nonviolence, and he rejects the use of all animal products, including dairy, leather, wool, and silk. He's a serious student of Jain philosophy and has published on Jainism and animal ethics. He delivered the opening keynote address at the 15th Biannual Jaina Convention in July 2009 and has spoken at other Jain events as well. He also completed a series of interviews for Mangalam, the Jain TV program. So with that, it's my pleasure to present to you this morning Professor Francione, and he will speak to us on Jainism and relativity. Professor Francione, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. I also appreciated Deep's discussion because she made me feel that even though those of us who are getting older, we can still do things. So I feel that there's still some left in here. Let me share my screen with you. Okay, I want to share my PowerPoint here. Actually, I want to share that. All right, let me go back to the beginning. Okay. Now, is there somebody who's better with these technological things than I, which means basically everybody in the room? At the top of my screen, there is a mute, stop video, security, participants, etc. bar that stops me from seeing the slideshow bar. Is there some way, because I want to, oh, wait a minute, here, I've got it from the beginning. Okay, there we go. All right, very good. Okay, my topic is Jainism and relativism. And I want to thank the Jain Education and Research Foundation, the Jain Center of South Florida, and the Florida International University Department of Religious Studies, and that introduction from Dean Larson. I want to thank you for hosting this and for inviting me. I also want to thank Acharya Mahaprajna, whose 100th birthday this is celebrating. You can't see in back of me now, there is, or if you can see the little thumbnail, you can see over here, that is my diploma from Preksha meditation. That was taught to me by Samani Mudit Pragya, who is now Sadhvi Mimansa Prabha, and Samani Shukla Pragya, who's now Sadhvi Samta Prabha. And they taught me Preksha meditation. And over here actually is the Namakar mantra. And there's a picture of Acharya Bhikshu, Acharya Tulsi, Acharya Mahaprajna, and Acharya Mahashraman. And so I'm a big devotee of the Terapants. Okay, the centerpiece of the Jain doctrine of relativism is Anikantvad. Anikantvad is an ontological doctrine. It's an ontological doctrine because it concerns the nature of existence, of what is. It claims that reality is irreducibly complex. All substances are complex, and each has innumerable characteristics, qualities, modes, relations, facets, and aspects. Because reality is complex, we who are not Keval Gyan, who have omniscience, as it were, those of us who do not have Keval Gyan cannot have pramana, or knowledge of, or full knowledge of reality. We can only know things from a particular point of view. So the Jain doctrine of Anikantvad says that reality is irreducibly complex. The Jain doctrine of nagavada says that we can only know, those of us who are not Keval Gyan can only know things from particular perspectives. That is the doctrine of nagavada. The doctrine of Sayavada is the linguistic or logical extension of that, in that we cannot make categorical statements about substances because we can't have full knowledge of those substances. We can only speak from a particular naya or perspective. And we can only make statements from within the naya or perspective. And those statements always need to be qualified, because they always need to be qualified because they can only at best reflect the particular naya from which they are made. So we have Anikantvad that tells us that reality is irreducibly complex. We have Nayavada, which tells us that we can't know absolute reality. All we can do is know reality from particular perspectives. And Sayavada, which tells us that we can't speak in absolute propositions. The Jain theory of relativism is very, very different from the theory of relativism as understood in the West. This is extremely important, and it's extremely important because, as I'm going to argue in a few minutes, I think a problem is that many Jains tend to collapse the Jain theory of relativism into the Western theory of relativism, and I think that that's a fundamental mistake. In the West, in philosophical, in Western philosophy, relativism means that the truth of anything, or the truth of morality, has to exist in relationship to some culture or society or historical context. There is no absolute truth. I think that is very different, completely different from Jain relativism that maintains that there is absolute truth. But there is not absolute truth that we can know. We can only know it from a particular perspective. But there is an absolute truth out there. If we were Keval Gyan, if we attained Vitaraga, if we were liberated, if we could see clearly, then we would see the absolute reality. But we're not. So we cannot understand reality in the pramana sense, the absolute sense. We can only understand it from the sense of the naya. Now, the historical basis of Nayavada, of all of this actually, the entire doctrine of Anikantvad, was to try to steer a middle path between the Buddhists, who had this idea of radical impermanence, that nothing was permanent, and the Hindu Brahmanic position that talked about, had a very strong sense of permanence. And the Jain position, the middle path, was that reality was both permanent and impermanent. So that's the historical, that it developed, the doctrine of Anikantvad, Nayavad, Sayavad developed as a sort of a middle path, as between the Buddhist notion of
Gary, you got muted. We cannot hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Have I been muted from the beginning?
No. Just
Oh.
last two sentences. Last
Oh,
two
okay, fine. Thank you very much, because I got a note that the host had muted me. I was wondering if I'd said something wrong. Michami dukadam. Sorry. Okay, so the Jain theory was the middle path between the Buddhist notion of impermanence and the Hindu notion of permanence. Okay. It is crucial to understand that Anikantvad, Nayadvad, is primarily about substances. It's a doctrine that applies to substances. When it talks about the perspectives on reality, it's talking about reality in terms of substances. Jiv, souls, Pudgal, matter, Dharma, motion, Adharma, rest, Akasa, space, Kala, time, and the modes of these substances. So I don't know why my, okay. All right, so the seven Nayas, there are seven Nayas, seven of these and Nayavad comprises seven different perspectives, although there are probably many more. There are seven primary perspectives, and they deal with what we call Dravya Naya and Paryaya Naya, that is, the substances and the modes of the substances. We cannot make absolute statements about the substances because the statements are permanent in one sense and impermanent in another. The problem is that in more recent times, Anikantvad, which originally developed to talk about the world, reality, has been used sort of as this radical doctrine of pluralism, that it originally started with religious pluralism, but now it has been applied to, it is used to support a form of moral pluralism. That is, there is no right or wrong. There's no absolute right or wrong. Anikantvad, is evoked. I think that this is problematic, and I think it's problematic for two reasons. Because Anikantvad, Nayadvad, and Saidvad are all about substances and modes of substances. And so to try to start applying these things to religions or to moral situations is problematic, because it's taking Anikantvad from the context in which it was developed and applying it in a situation that, number two, reduces Jainism to the Western doctrine of relativism, which denies absolute truth. That is the problem. Now, to the extent that you're talking, say, about Christianity, and you say that, Christianity talks about love, and Jainism talks about vitaraga and sort of no attachment, no avoidance, you can say, well, these are the ideal states, and they're described from different perspectives, but we're really talking about the ideal states in both of these religions. And love in the Christian sense is really not about passionate love. It's about agapistic love. It's about non-passionate love. It's about the idea of the identification of the self with the other, and to care about the other as much as one cares about the self, and to have no attachments in which one values others more than one values everyone. That is the ideal of Christian love. Now, that's not very much talked about, but that is the ideal of Christian love. In many ways, it is very, very close to the Jain notion of no attachment, no avoidance, and vitaraga. It's very, very, very close. The Jain doctrine, as I understand it, and as I was taught doesn't say that I shouldn't have concern about everyone. It says I shouldn't have concern for any one person more than I do for any other person. And I should not allow my behavior to be influenced by any passionate feelings that I have for particular people. So one can say, well, in that sense, you can look at Christianity and the doctrine of love, and you can look at Jainism and the doctrine of vitaraga, and you can see some similarities, okay? But in this case, what we're the substance that we're talking about is really the soul, right? The jiv. So you are talking about substances, but there is a sense in which it's not consistent. You can't say all religions are true, because you've got a situation with Christianity. Christianity says the world was created by God, by a God. And there's a God, that there's a creator, and that love is a commandment. It's not something that is required for liberation as a matter of the physics of jiva and ajiva and the involvement of karma. You can't say these things are in conflict. So you can't say, well, that Jainism is completely reconcilable with Christianity. It's not. There may be important aspects, which can be understood in terms of, of similar ideas in both religious traditions, but they are not consistent, okay, in other ways. Morality, particularly issues of fundamental issues of morality, killing, murder, rape, can't be accommodated in this sort of framework. When we're talking about serious issues of fundamental rights and morality, we can't say, well, it's a matter of ani kantvad. Let me give you an example. Veganism, most Jains are vegetarians. As a matter of fact, I've never met a Jain, and I've met thousands of them. I've never met a Jain I'm sure that I've met Jains who are not vegetarians, but no one's ever admitted to not being a vegetarian. Every Jain I've ever met says they're a vegetarian. Problem is, most Jains that I've met are not vegans. So they don't consume meat, but they consume dairy, and they consume, they have milk, they have ghee, they have butter. They wear, they use dairy in pooja events. They use, they wear silk, they wear leather. All of these things contain animal products. Now, all animal products, including dairy, all of them, involve suffering and death imposed on mobile, five-sensed beings. Okay, some forms of production are more brutal than other forms of production, but under the very best of circumstances, under the very most humane of circumstances, there's a great deal of suffering that is involved in the production of these products. And death is a necessary aspect of any industry or practice that uses animals. We can't be using animals in any institutionalized way where death is not involved the death of animals is not involved in that process. There's no such thing. Animals used in dairy production are kept alive longer than animals used for meat. And they are treated worse and end up in the same slaughterhouses than animals that are used for meat. The male babies of dairy cows are sold into the veal industry. Most of the females are used in the dairy industry. It's an endless cycle of suffering, exploitation, and death. There's an inextricable relationship between the meat industry and the dairy industry. And the problem is not just in the United States or other Western countries. Okay. For example, this is an article from Statecraft, which talks about, and there's many such articles, in which we are told that India is the second largest beef exporter in the world. Second largest. India is the second largest beef exporter in the world after Brazil. Okay. And the Indian livestock sector contributed about 4.5% of India's total GDP in 2015, 2016. This is, trying to see if I can get this thing out of here. Okay. India is the world's largest milk producer with 22% of global production, followed by the United States of America, China, Pakistan, and Brazil. That's from the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization. So India is exporting, the second largest exporter of beef and the largest milk producer in the entire world. This is written by a man named Sagar Shah. He is British, he's a Jain, and Sagar has traveled around India, has written extensively on the treatment of animals in India. And this is something from him, although he's written an enormous amount on this. The treatment of cows and buffaloes associated with dairy cooperatives is full of violence. Cows and bulls are prematurely sent for slaughter, often across states. Cows often suffer from inflamed udders. Calves are separated from their mothers. There's inadequate protection from the elements. And there are cruel reproductive programs involving artificial insemination and crossbreeding with non-native breeds. Moreover, much of the other milk available in India comes from private dairies or tabelas, where conditions are even worse. So Sagar's argument is that even in the Indian cooperatives, which are thought to be producing less, ahimsa milk, it's not ahimsa at all. That, some milk production may involve less himsa than other milk production, but it can't be doubted that all milk production involves at least some himsa, under the best of circumstances, some himsa inflicted on mobile 5-sensed beings. So this is a serious issue. This is a serious issue. And what concerns me is that it seems that many Jains have drawn a very artificial line between meat and all other animal products. Now, I understand there are historical reasons for that, but the historical reasons for that, or traditions, I'm going to get to this in a second, but the historical reasons for that and the traditions cannot justify, if something is wrong, if something is ahimsic, then it needs to be explored. It cannot be accepted simply because it's been done for a long time, or because historically Jainism grew up in a country in which Hinduism was a much larger Dharma, a much larger tradition, and influenced Jainism. We have this idea about milk being less problematic than meat. I would respectfully suggest you can't make that argument. There's no morally coherent distinction between meat and other animal products. Many people still hold the idyllic concept of the dairy cow that grazes in the pasture, is provided with good care, and has had a good life. If milk or other products come from such an animal, how can they be morally problematic? Well, in the first place, no animal products come from such animals. Almost all dairy products, wherever in the world they are produced, come from animals kept in intensive conditions known as factory farming. They involve unspeakable brutality and violence. Even those that are raised in free-range circumstances, or whose products are advertised as organic or whatever, they may be slightly less brutal than the factory farm, like the Indian dairy cooperatives. I'm sure that the Indian dairy cooperatives are not as bad as Western factory dairy farms, but they still involve violence, suffering, and death. The person who keeps the one, only one cow, let's say, but my great-great-grandmother used to have one cow. Well, you were probably very little when you were with your great-great-grandmother, and maybe you didn't observe the things that you would observe as an adult. But the person who keeps only one cow on his or her property has to keep that cow pregnant in order to give milk. And that means that there will be a steady stream of calves. And in most cases, most of those calves will end up on someone's table. And whenever a calf is separated from the mother, there is a tremendous amount of suffering. I must say, I have been in slaughterhouses. I have been on factory farms. I've seen a lot of things in my life that I really frankly wish I didn't see. But one of the worst things I've ever seen, and I really mean this, is watching the separation of a calf from the calf's mother. The mother gets very agitated. She cries. She tries to follow the calf. It's really, really horrible. The idea of the cow grazing happily in the field and being a member of the family and whatnot, this is a fantasy. It is a fantasy. However we produce these products, however humane they may be, they involve himsa. It is important. It is crucial for us as Jains to understand that it involves himsa. And it involves himsa imposed on mobile, multi-sense beings. And we are mobile, multi-sense beings. So in a sense, we aren't supposed to make distinctions amongst mobile, multi-sense beings. And we are 5-sense beings. And most of the animals we exploit are 5-sense beings. So it is important for us to understand that however humane the process is, it involves himsa. There's no getting away from that. Now, the arguments there are several arguments I've encountered when I talk to Jains about this. One is, well, it's possible to produce milk without himsa, so it's okay to consume milk. Well, let's think about that for a second. First of all, I would suggest it is impossible to produce milk without himsa. It is impossible. You can't do it. And I've been told that well, in some of these smaller dairy cooperatives, the calf is allowed to drink as much milk as the calf wants to drink. Sagar Shah, who has visited these many, if not most of these cooperatives, writes extensively that the calves are not permitted to drink. They can't drink what they want to drink from the mother, because if they did, there would not be enough milk left over for human consumption. So they have all sorts of things where, you know, the calf has a ring in the nose that's got little spikes on it so that the calf cannot drink comfortably. You know, the mother gets upset and sort of pushes the calf away, etc. There are all sorts of ways. Sometimes the calf is just kept in, you know, different parts of the yard or the area. They often have their snouts tied and things like that. So this idea that, well, you know, it's all very natural. It's not natural at all, because you can't have it be natural and still have enough milk left for human consumption. The other argument I've gotten is that it's tradition. People say, well, you know, yes, I know I'm not a vegan, but it's tradition. You know, I mean, very few of us are vegan, and it's a tradition. We drink milk in our chai. We consume ghee in our we use ghee in our cooking, et cetera, et cetera. You know, we wear silk, we wear wool, we wear leather, and these are traditions. But if Jainism means anything, if Jainism has any intellectual pull, it requires that we reject tradition. It's a dharma that requires that we examine all of our beliefs rationally and that we look at things in a rational way. Tradition, relying on tradition, is the opposite of rational examination. It's the opposite of rational examination. If something is wrong, the fact that we've been doing it for a long time doesn't make it right. There are all sorts of things that human beings have been doing for a long, long time. Wars, for example, discrimination, for example, injustice, for example. The fact that those things have been done for a long time doesn't make them right. And I'm sure you would all agree with me as Jains. And it's not just a problem with dairy. You know, wool, the shearing of sheep for wool involves an unspeakable amount of violence. The animals are frightened. I don't know if you've ever seen sheep shearing, but it's very violent. And the sheep get nicked and they're frightened. They're prey animals. So they get frightened when you touch them. And so when people are throwing them over and shaving them and stuff, they get nicked, they get cut, they're terrified. And ultimately, they don't die of old age. I mean, the sheep that are used to produce wool ultimately are slaughtered. Silk is produced by boiling silkworms alive. Leather involves wearing the skin of an animal that's endured suffering and a violent death at the hand of humans. You know, I remember once when I was visiting the temple in Queens, there was a sign by the darasha that said, no leather inside the darasha. You had to take off your watch. If you had a leather watch band, or, you know, you didn't have your shoes on anyway, but if you had a watch band on, you couldn't have the leather watch band when you went into the inner area of the darasha. And I remember discussing this afterwards with several people. And I said, if you've got a sign that says you're not supposed to wear leather inside when you're near the murtis and whatnot, why is it okay to wear it outside? If it's offensive, if it presents some sort of moral affront to the belief in ahimsa, if it provides a sort of, if it's offensive to the belief in ahimsa to wear it inside the darasha, why is it okay to wear it outside? I never got a good answer for that. The bottom line is that meat involves ahimsa, but so do all other animal products. Veganism is the only position consistent with ahimsa. And now I must say, in the time I've been doing this, that I've been just talking with Jains about veganism, I have found them to be a receptive audience. I think a lot of Jains have changed. I think a lot of Jains are moving towards veganism, but it's still very difficult. I mean, I remember maybe 4 years ago, whenever there was a Jaina convention coming up, and I offered to pay for all of the ice cream and milk and stuff. I offered to pay for all of it if it could be plant milk and soy or coconut or almond milk, ice cream, the no animal products. And I offered to pay for that. And I also offered to pay for anything that they were using ghee for. I was willing to pay for a plant-based margarine or something that could be used in the cooking. So I offered to do this, and it was going to be quite expensive. And I offered to do it, and I said, I will do this just so we can have a Jaina convention that is ahimsic, that doesn't have violence. And two things happened. My offer was not accepted because I was told that this violated the principle of ani kanvad because it was wrong to tell people what to do. Well, you were telling them what to do because you weren't serving meat. You were telling, this is what I don't understand. There's really no distinction between the meat and the dairy. And so I was told we can't do that because that would violate ani kanvad. Again, relativism. It's using the Western concept of relativism and saying that the violence in terms of dairy is not a matter of absolute truth. But that makes no sense. And there's no way you can say that the violence of meat is absolutely wrong. It is a matter of absolute truth because it violates ahimsa, and dairy doesn't. There's just no way to do that. There's no way that can work. And so I was told, as I said, two things happened. One was I was told, no, we can't do that because it would violate the principle of ani kanvad. And the second thing that happened was I wasn't invited to any more Jaina conventions. So I think that I probably, despite my invocation of Machami Dukadam 4,000 times, I think I really offended people. Now remember, all animal products involve death, but it's not just killing that's himsa. This is from the Acharya Sutra. The Arhats Bhagavats of the past, present, and future all say thus, speak thus, declare thus, explain thus. All breathing, living, sentient creatures should not be slain, nor treated with violence, nor abused, nor tormented, nor driven away. So it's not just a question of killing them, although all animal products involve killing them. It is a matter of not treating them with violence, not tormenting them, not driving them away. So separating a calf from the mother is himsa. Even if you don't kill, which is going to happen anyway, because you're going to have male calves that are going to end up finding their way into India's meat system. But so even if you don't kill the animal, you still are making the animal suffer. And this is wrong. Suffering is inevitable in life. We are all going to suffer. But the thing of it is we are imposing this suffering on those animals, and that is himsic. This is from Book 1, Lecture 4 of the first lesson of the Acharya Sutra. And if anybody wants citations, I've got many more. But anyway, the final, so we can't, the idea that if we're going to invoke ani kanvad to justify non-veganism, then there's no way to invoke. There's no principled way of excluding the invocation of ani kanvad to talk about the consumption of meat. There's just no way to do that. So if everything's relative, then murder, you can't say that killing human beings is wrong. Ani kanvad. So you can't, this is the problem. Once you use this understanding of ani kanvad as moral relativism, it makes the whole system collapse. The system cannot sustain itself. The system falls apart because it cannot logically be defended. I would also say it's not just veganism that troubles me about, I've read quite a bit about, Jain saying, well, violence is bad, but violence that defends one's country is okay. Well, wait a minute now. It would seem to me that we'd need to have a very serious discussion about war, about whether war can ever be justified if we really believe in ahimsa. because basically wars are they're complex phenomena, and they are oftentimes and almost always used to protect people's material position in life, and so there's a very serious question about whether we can ever defend war. It would seem to me that the Jain position would have to be, at the very least, that a war has to be just before the himsa of war can be justified. But just to say, to defend one's country, that one has a patriotic duty to defend one's country, and to go to war whenever told, strikes me as being profoundly inconsistent with the doctrine of ahimsa. I mean, something else that I would say, and I know that, I don't really talk much about this because I know that I will never get invited to a Jaina convention for as long as I'm on the earth this time around if I talk about the problems of capitalism, because I do think that, many Jains, many of my Jain colleagues defend capitalism and think capitalism is a fine system. It's not clear to me that can be defended, and that there is violence involved in that capitalism involves a certain amount of violence. We could talk about that perhaps at another conference, but I do think that there are some issues raised there. But in any event, in conclusion, Anikantvad, Naidvad, Saidvad pertain to substances, not to moral situations, and these doctrines do not deny absolute truth. So using them to say that, well, there can be no absolute truth about the violence of dairy, means that you can say, well, you can use these doctrines to say there's no absolute truth about the violence of meat, or the violence of murder, or the violence of rape, or the violence of anything else, that everything else becomes a matter of relativism. Now, I do want to say one thing that I think is very important about the doctrine of Anikantvad. One of the substances is the soul, jiv. Okay, it's jiv, pudgal, okay, dharma, adharma, and so one of the substances is jiv, the soul. What Anikantvad tells us, and I think it's a very valuable lesson, is that we cannot we cannot judge people, because unless we're keval gyan, they're jiv, because of the nature of the jiv and the nature of the interaction of the jiv and the karma. Their jiv is in a constant state of it's a permanent substance, obviously, but it's impermanent in terms of its modes, largely because of the influence of karma. So in that sense, I think that we can't judge other people. So when I'm having a discussion with one of my Jain colleagues about veganism, and the person saying that I'm not a vegan, I am morally obligated not to judge that person, because I'm not keval gyan, and I can't judge that person, but I can judge the action. I must judge the action if I am committed to ahimsa. It is what the religion, the dharma of ahimsa is to take a stand on the absolute truth of ahimsa. I'm sure I've offended people. Michami Dukadam, Om Arham, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gary Francione. And it was such a truth and dare of the reality of what we practice and what we really are. And I would open the scenario for questions. If anybody has any question, you can unmute yourself or put it in the chat as you please.
Hi, this is Sapan. Dr. Gary, thank you very much for a very engaging talk. I have a question. Do you think there is himsa in farming or agriculture? And what are the moral implications according to you of that?
Well, of course, there's always going to be incidental and unintentional harm when we're planting crops, right? We're going to, we may harm unintentionally. We may harm animals unintentionally. One of the doctrines of Jainism, one of the most profound aspects of Jain Dharma is that our living has consequences. This is one of the reasons why the sadhvis and sadhus don't travel very much is because, and one of the reasons why the Samanijis have to have special dispensation to come to America is because they realize that traveling and doing things, and one of the reasons why they have the Murpati is because it's a constant reminder of the fact that our lives as material beings necessarily has a negative impact on other beings. So we can't avoid, in living in the world, we can't avoid harming others. Because, I mean, think about it. You buy clothes. The clothes are made by, in companies. The people are accidentally harmed in the production of the things that we buy, the things that we use. We build roads. We know that people are going to be killed on those roads when they're driving their cars and things like that. And so everything we do has a negative impact on others. So what this tells us is that we should all try to limit our activities. And number one. Number two, we ought to try to consume as little as possible. And we ought to try in our daily lives to avoid harming as much as we can. For example, when I walk, if there's any way I can avoid it, I don't walk on grass. I walk on the sidewalk or on the street, and I'm generally looking down to make sure that I'm not walking on insects because I don't wish to kill them. So living an ahimsic life is not just a matter of veganism is not sufficient for living an ahimsic life. It's necessary, in my judgment, for an ahimsic life, but it's not sufficient. There's other things you need to do. You need to control your consumption. You need to watch other aspects of your life. But if we were all vegans, and we all really did take seriously our respect for the non-human life, and the jiva of non-human life, then I would think that we would all try to be more careful when we planted crops. We wouldn't use pesticides to the extent that we do. And by the way, if we were all vegans, we would not need to produce as many crops as we do, because most of the crops we produce are being fed to animals. But yeah, so I agree. Yeah, of course, there's animal agriculture involves, agriculture, plant agriculture involves harm. But that's like saying building a road. If I'm an actuary, I can tell you at 50 miles an hour, 12 people will be killed on this stretch of road. But there's still a difference between building that road and murdering 12 people. We still draw that line. So we can't avoid all himsa in our lives. We just can't do it. But we can try very, very hard. And when we are engaging in the himsa of consuming dairy or using wool or leather or whatever, that's no different. With my argument is that's no different from the himsa of meat. And so if you think the himsa of meat, if you think however problematic drawing the line is, if we think that the himsa of meat is on the side of no, we can't do that, then it's not clear to me how this other stuff can be on the side of, well, it's up for grabs. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, and absolutely. I think thanks for that explanation. And I mean, age old, or what sort of we have logically understood, has always been that flesh of animal is to be absolutely avoided. That's hinsa. But a product which comes from that, like cow's milk specifically, I think that's the only thing I would say Jains consume mainly from animals, where maybe there is moderation, there is not, right? It's everyone's personal truth there. But nobody, I think, when they consume at least things that the milk comes as a from hinsa, or that, I mean, we all try to look grass fed and all that. But again, I think your points are very valid, sir.
Let me just tell you, grass fed, all that stuff about some milk being, even if I would say two things. Number one, I don't think that there's any significant less violence with that sort of special milk, number one. Number two, even if there is still himsa involved. It is not ahimsic. There's no way you can say it's ahimsic. But thank you very much for your question.
Hi, Gary. Great talk. Thanks very much. Hi, my name is Steph Mehta from Orlando. I had a question more morally. You're very good friends that you you feel are doing hinsa, just like you described, they're probably vegetarians who are doing hinsa. Where do you draw the line between, if you like, educating them versus feeling that you're going to offend them, and that also is hinsa? Do you have an approach that you take that maybe I could adopt?
Well, I mean, look, I try to make a distinction. I try to make a distinction between judging people and judging actions. And I always say that to people when I'm talking with them, is that, and that comes from the fact that I do believe Anikantvad applies to, I'm not Keval Gyan, so I can't see your soul. I can't understand all the aspects. I don't know who you are in terms of you as a complete being, because your jiva is constantly changing as a result of its interactions with karma and whatnot. I can't understand all that. So I am not in a position to judge you. And so I always make clear to the people I'm talking with, I'm not judging them. What I'm doing is I am asking them to consider whether or not, I mean, most of the people that I'm in contact with are people who think animals matter morally. In other words, there are lots of Western people who don't think animals matter at all. So them is really not much I can say to them. But to the people who believe that animals matter, I always explain to them, or try to discuss with them and try to engage them about how they can justify the suffering and the death that they're imposing, which they clearly are. And I actually don't find that, these sorts of discussions, like anything that matters morally, these sorts of discussions are offensive only when you make them offensive. If you don't, people get upset when they think you're judging them and you think that they're bad people. And I always go out of my way to say, look, I'm not saying you're a bad person. I'm not, I don't have that perspective that I can say you're a bad person. I'm not saying you're a bad person. I'm just saying something's going on here that you need to take a closer look at and think a little bit more about. And if you care about animals, you really need to think a little bit more about it, because it doesn't make any sense. And so, and I actually, I find that, that I don't, I don't know whether I offended the Jain. I suspect I did when I offered to buy all the dairy products for the Jain convention. I probably did offend them. But, but at some point in time, you also have to be careful about the idea that, that you shouldn't stand up for what's right because you're frightened of offending people. I would take the position that a lot of things that we do are really bad. I mean, I think we're very unfair to poor people, for example, in the United States of America. I think we're very, very, very unfair to them. And I think what's going on right at this very minute, in terms of not giving people extending their benefits, which expired last night. And so that many people are now in very, very grave danger of being out on the streets, I think is horribly cruel. And now, if I say that, is it going to offend some of my Republican friends who are not, who have a great deal of love and affection or whatever for Donald Trump? The answer is, well, it might offend them, but it's true. And I have to say it. And it's not, in my judgment, it's not ahimsa. It's not himsa, rather, to say that we ought not let people starve in this country. We ought not have people being put out on the streets on December 27th. I think that's wrong. So I think we do have to take positions on things.
I just wanted to find out how you are separating actions from the people, because you're saying you're not judging people, you're judging their actions. Actions do not perform independently of the human beings that are engaging in it. So when you judge action, you're also judging the person. Even though you may say that you are not judging, you're still judging them. So instead of judging, the educating part is good, that you educate people about the ignorance that they may have, and so then they can make better decisions. I don't think that you can separate the actions from the individuals.
Well, but that's actually not true. I don't believe that. I mean, you may believe that. I don't. I know many Jains, for example, who I think are really good people, but they're not vegans. So I mean, the fact that they're, I think they may be, Plato, the Western philosopher Plato, used to take the position that all wrongdoing came from ignorance, not from malevolence. And so you can judge the action as wrong, but not judge the individual as malevolent. And as I say, I know lots of people who are not vegans, who are very good people. They're just not vegans. And I think that their non-veganism, I think of their non-veganism as, in a Platonic sense, as coming from ignorance and not coming from malevolence.
So then we need to have compassion for people that are ignorant and educate them rather than criticize them.
Well, the problem is with that is that education, when you try, you know, if you're talking to somebody who's not a vegan, who feels very touchy about the situation, the line between education and criticism becomes very, very difficult to draw. And so if you feel very sensitive about something, anything that somebody says to educate you could be understood as criticism. So, you know, I mean, I think you know, you're treating these concepts as sort of in a box, you know, that there's sort of they're defined in some way and they're discrete, and they're not.
So that's why I was pointing it out, because I thought when you said judge the action and not the people, that you were putting the two in separate boxes, the action and the people. I
am putting them in separate boxes, because I don't think I can say an action is immoral without saying that the person performing it is acting malevolently. Again, I just go back.
You can say that they are immoral because they are not engaging in moral action.
They're acting immorally. Why they're acting immorally is a different question, but they're acting immorally. It doesn't mean that they're bad people. It means they're acting immorally.
Well, thank you so much for your presentation. We really appreciate your clarifying the different issues.
Thank you.
I have a question, Professor.
Yes.
This is Kirti Jain. When we minimize hinsa for living, and that's fine, but still there is some hinsa involved in living.
Right.
So the implicit outcome of that is that my life is more important than yours. What does Jainism say about it? And second part of the question is there any guidance offered as to where to draw the line, and why is that relevant?
Well, where you draw the line is when you're engaging in conduct that actively inflicts suffering on other sentient beings. So now when I was talking with is it Sapan? Is that yes? When I was talking to Sapan, I was saying that incidental exploitation, unintentional exploitation, or harming others unintentionally and incidentally, is something we can't avoid, which is one of the reasons why I think it's important to try to live one's life in a way so that one is not, one is trying to minimize one's impact on the earth. I mean, one of the greatest ways you can minimize your impacts on the earth is to go vegan, because it is the single most important thing you can do to avoid ecological devastation. So you can, I mean, bar none, you could have 5 gas-consuming vehicles and still have a smaller carbon footprint if you were a vegan who owned all those vehicles. So I think we ought to do what we can to try to minimize violence. For example, even before the pandemic, I was taking the position when I was getting invited to talk at places that people would invite me and they would say, we'll pay your expenses and we'll put you in a hotel. And I'd say, no, I will do this online. I will do it by Skype. I will do it by Zoom. I will do it by webinar or WebEx, because traveling involves harming. Because when I'm in an airplane, air travel is tremendously himsic in terms of the bad effects that it has on humans and on animals. And so I've cut down my air travel probably by 90%, at least, maybe more. So now the talks I do are online. I don't charge anybody. They don't have to fly me over. They don't have to put me in a hotel. They don't have to do any of that stuff, because I cut down on that. I think just by I try whenever I'm going to buy something, I always ask myself, do I really need that? Is that something I need? And if I don't, if the answer is, yeah, I absolutely need it. If the answer is not, I absolutely need it, I don't buy it. And so, but I don't think what I think is important is not to say that, well, since we can't avoid all violence, then the violence of dairy is okay. That's where I think we run into problems, because that is violence that we deliberately impose. We make a decision. When I have my tea, I make the decision. Am I going to put milk in the tea, or am I going to put soy milk in the tea? That's a decision I'm making to impose suffering on another sentient being. And that's, I think, where we've got an obligation to sort of, in the same way, you can't say, well, we're all responsible for harming. So what's the difference if I eat a hamburger or a steak? Because that's the same reasoning. And it's the same thing. There's really no way to distinguish those situations. So I agree with you completely. We live in the world, and we're always going to be engaged in action, which is going to have a detrimental impact on other sentient beings. We should try to minimize that as much as possible by not engaging directly in conduct which imposes harm, murdering other humans, murdering animals, or consuming animal products that can only be provided by imposing death and suffering on them. All of those things are things that we can easily do. And then we need to do other things. We need to control our consumption. We need to control our traveling. We need to sort of think and we all ought to meditate. We ought to do praksha meditation. Here's my pitch for praksha meditation. We ought to do praksha meditation so that we can get closer to a state of vitaraga, so that we don't come back again.
So what about the first part of the question, which is philosophical, but the question is, any living involves some violence, and
Right.
and that's implicit idea there is, my life is more important than yours because I need to live. Is there any guidance or any statement in the Shastras?
Well, I once asked one of the Samniji, maybe Sulek can help me. Sulek, are you there?
Yes, I am here.
Sulek, who was the Samniji who came? She was the rector of the Jain Vishabharati University for a while.
Sanmati Pragya?
Charitra Pragya ji.
Charitra Pragya ji.
Maybe Chaitra. Okay, she was visiting New Jersey, and I used to go to the center quite a bit. As a matter of fact, they stopped calling me Gary and they started calling me Jigyasu, because I would sit around for hours and ask questions, and we would have these discussions. So when she was over from India, we had this discussion, and I asked her that question. I said, does not Jain Dharma teach us that we should commit suicide? Because by living, we are necessarily impacting others, and we are thereby elevating our lives above theirs. And we talked for about 3 hours on that. And she basically said, no, suicide would be the worst thing that you could do, unless you get to the point where your life is you're no longer able to do anything spiritual in your life, and therefore you fast unto death. But she said, but suicide is not permitted. So given that suicide isn't an option, indeed is something which is ruled out, then all we can do is minimize as much as we can the violence that we're responsible for. And we certainly can eliminate virtually all of the violence that we're responsible for directly, which we participate directly. And we can eliminate much, not all, of everything that we participate in indirectly, because we still have to buy shirts, and the shirt's still going to be made by a company, and there's going to be workers who are injured in the production, et cetera. There's no way you can get around that. On the other hand, you can eliminate much of it by limiting your consumption, and then just try to move as much as you can towards the state of moksha, so we don't have to do it all again. It's the best answer I can give you. Sorry.
Yes, hello, Professor.
Yes.
My name is Naina Mehta, and I'm from Orlando.
Hi.
And it was a wonderful talk, and I'm really impressed at all the things that you've done and what you were talking about. I just want to make a comment, actually, that I became vegan maybe over 20 years ago after I had listened to a lecture with some slides and video presentation of what goes on in a milk factory, like where the cows are kept for milk or where the chickens are kept for eggs.
Yeah.
And that's actually what hit me and then made me, okay, this is it, I'm going to become vegan. And my personal feeling is that eating meat is actually drinking milk is worse than people who eat meat, because the cows are suffering the whole time in those things. And when you take them for a slaughterhouse, one thing, and then they're killed. I'm not saying that that's a less violence, but just in the sense that when we're keeping the milk factories in production and the cows are kept that way, or the chickens are kept that way, we're actually causing suffering for much longer.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I agree with you 100%. But I once wrote something in a Jain publication in which I made that very comment. And one of my very good Jain friends told me that was not a good thing to say, that it would upset Jains to say, because what I said was, I thought there was as much, if not more, violence in a glass of milk as there is in a pound of steak. And my friend, a very learned Jain man, said to me, "Don't say that sort of thing. You're going to upset people." So I'm glad you said it and I didn't. But I agree.
I'm so sorry. I hope I haven't upset all the Jains that are listening to this, but that's just my personal opinion. And just like you said, I'm not judging anyone, but just how I have been feeling and what I feel. So michami dukaram if I have.
I actually wish, I actually should have a little recording device that I wear around my neck that just says Machami Dukadam constantly, because whenever I'm talking to Jains, I have to do that. But anyway, so yes, go ahead. Other questions?
Gary Bhai.
Yes, Sulat Bhai.
I just want to make a comment. I've been vegan for the last 35 years. And
oh, yes.
Actually, you know that.
Yes.
And thanks to you. What I'm saying is people have this fallacy that if you have your own cows, if you treat it like a mother, and that milk is still okay. I grew up in a very small village in Haryana in India.
Yes.
And we had 2 cows. And this is a real story. And naturally, we treated it like a family members and all of those things. And we treated the calf as well. But what did we do? The cow has a life of about 20 to 25 years natural life. The milking age only up to the age of 14.
Yep.
Still has 10 years or more life left. Completely unproductive, uneconomical. It's a burden. It's a white elephant. What did we do? No, unknowingly, we donated that dhan to a Brahmin. Okay, as if we were doing. Now my problem, I just unloaded on the Brahmin.
Yeah.
After 2-3 days, that Brahmin sold it to a butcher.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. This fallacy always, that cows in India were treated, as you said, always it comes from an animal. Any animal product coming like this has a footprints of himsa, footprints of violence. So that milk, now I know, and that's why I became 35 years ago vegan. It never was it was never was an insect product. There was always cruelty.
Yeah, and the thing is that I'm sure there was less himsa involved in in that situation. But it's funny when you're here talking to people who are from Chicago or Los Angeles or New York or whatever, and they're telling me these stories. And I want to say, well, you know what? I would disagree with you. I would think that there was himsa involved in that situation. However, you can't get that milk now. When you go to the store, you can't buy that milk now. So how can it be okay to go to the store and buy the milk that's got much more himsa, and because you think that there's possibly a way of doing it that involves no himsa. But I think, as you correctly point out, all animal products have the footprint of himsa. All of them do. But I agree. But thank you very much.
I have a question.
Okay.
Many Jains in my discussion would say that Lord Mahavira and many other acharyas that happened to live hundreds of years ago, they used the milk products. And if they would have known that there is a hinsa, they would not have used it. And basically, many times they justify that argument that it is okay to use the milk products even now in the temple by using a milk product that does not involve much hinsa. What would you say to that argument?
I would say this. I would say, first of all, my good friend who is now dead, Chitrabhanu used to have a very, I hope he's written it down somewhere. I've been trying to find it and I can't, but he used to give a talk and answer that question by saying that when you actually look at the scriptures and look at what was said, you really can't find support for drinking milk or whatever, or that this has been exaggerated. However, it is very common in religious theory, religious doctrines, whether it's Jain or Christian or Jewish or Muslim, to point at things that people did several thousand years ago, and say, well, they did it, so it's okay. And I remember there's a friend of mine. He actually sold me all of my English copies. I have a complete set of the Agams, but they're in English. But I bought them from a bookseller in India named Manish Modi, and I remember that Manish was asked a question similar to that at a convention once, and he said, if Lord Mahavir knew everything, then he would have built TV sets and several thousand years ago, and that we can't. Yes, he was omniscient in a spiritual sense, but that those were different times. I mean, there wasn't enough food that was being produced where people could eat enough. So perhaps it was, to the extent that people consumed animal products, it was a matter of necessity, that they would die if they didn't eat it, or they couldn't get good nutrition or whatever. Similar to the story about Jesus. There's a story, a biblical story, where Jesus has 2 fishes and he multiplies them and he feeds 5,000 people. And everybody always says, well, because there is evidence that Jesus was part of a Jewish mystical sect called the Essenes, and that the Essenes were largely vegan. They consumed honey, but apart from the honey, they were vegan. And so when people say, well, how could he have been an Essene? Because he talks about the fish. Well, the way the word fish was translated from the original Aramaic, etc., it leaves some doubt as to whether or not he was actually talking about fish or about food as a general matter. So Jesus might well have been a vegan. But even if Jesus wasn't a vegan, the fact that that Jesus was Jesus and that Christians believe he is God, doesn't necessarily mean that we can't think rationally about which more so in Jainism than in Christianity. Jainism requires that we always apply rational thinking. So if we were to uncover some agam, some hidden agam that said that that's got Mahavir eating a piece of meat, we wouldn't say, oh, okay, it's all right to eat meat. We'd say, well, if this is true, then he was wrong about that, because rationally we know that flesh involves killing, and we know that killing is wrong, and we know that killing is a form of himsa, and that killing is perhaps among the most serious forms of himsa. Similarly, to the extent that the scriptures clearly, and again, Chitrabhanu would say they're not as clear as a lot of Jains seem to think, but I'm not a Prakrit scholar, so I can't, and that's unfortunate. I wish I were, but I'm not a Prakrit scholar, so I don't know enough to be able to make a statement about this, except to say that Chitrabhanu, who was a very learned man and was able to read all these things in the original languages, said that he thought that this was terribly exaggerated and that one could not really find any clear proof that this was thought to be an okay thing. But even if it were the case, we as Jains living in 2020 need to apply rationality and say, okay, we're against violence. Is this violence? That's the only question that is relevant. Is this violence? If it is violence and it involves violence, there's no way, as Sulek Jain said, if it involves animals, there's a footprint of himsa. No matter how well we do it, there's a footprint of himsa. And if that is true as an empirical matter, we have no choice but to reject it as a matter of rationality, because that's what Jainism says: never accept anything on faith. Jainism says, except the fact that you accept, the 3 jewels requires that we accept certain things, but not on moral grounds. Jainism never, there is nothing in Jainism that says you have to accept the truth or falsity of moral issues as a matter of faith. Nothing. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, it's the exact opposite. We're supposed to be rational. So the only question is, empirically, does it involve violence?
Thank you, Dr. Gary. Keeping the time constraint, we have one more question, the last question by Dr. Surendra Pokharna, and he's going to ask you that question. Go ahead, Dr. Surendra Pokharna.
Yeah, congratulations for your excellent lecture, Mr. Gray.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Gary, I have a very specific suggestion. Actually, this is becoming a universal problem, and now the question of survival of the whole earth is at a real critical juncture. And as per some scientists, earth is moving towards 6th extinction. And in last 550 million years, only 5 times such extinctions have taken place. And that process has started. And science, technology, and economic development, these concepts are now held responsible for this big issue. Now, the suggestion is that United Nations has recognized October 2, the birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi, as an International Non-Violence Day. It was declared in 2007. Now, irrespective of all the contradictions and problems in this whole issue, I would suggest there is a need to celebrate this the International Non-Violence Day on October 2 on a very, very large scale on the whole earth, in whole 200 countries, so as to at least send an awareness about the need to save the earth in a very, very serious way.
Look, I couldn't agree with you more. We are in very serious trouble. Look at the fact that we have a pandemic right now. Where did the pandemic come from? It came from the fact that people are eating animals. All pandemics are zoonotic. They jump from animals to humans. And most of the time they're jumping from animals to humans because we're consuming animals. And the pandemic is a serious issue. And what is troubling is that we think we're going to solve the problem with the vaccine. Well, the vaccine, or the vaccines which are available, they may address this particular problem, but there's going to be another one 2 years down the road. If it takes that long, there'll be another one. And you're right, we are in a horrible, horrible situation in terms of the state of the world. I wrote yesterday to my friend Sulek Jain. I wrote to him, the world is in it. There's been no time where the world has not had a greater need for ahimsa. And unfortunately, we're never going to do this by having, a Mahatma Gandhi Day on October 2nd. This is not something you celebrate on one day. This is an idea that needs to be out there, and it needs to be out there broadly. One of the sad things about Jainism is that because Jains don't believe in proselytizing as a general matter, and because the Jain community tends to sort of be, Jains, it tends to be Indian Jains living, and so you've got the Indian Jains who live in India, and then you got the Indians in diaspora here, and the Indians in diaspora in England, and whatever, and they pretty much stay to their communities. The concept of ahimsa is a concept that is extremely important. It is perhaps the most important idea that human beings have ever generated in all of human history. And so the idea that we keep sort of keeping this light under the bushel is, I think, really problematic. And so I think, I wish Jains were more active about the doctrine of ahimsa and the importance of ahimsa, because it's what we're doing to the environment. It's what we're doing to each other. It's how we're commodifying each other. This is, I mean, again, we can talk all day about, I have issues about capitalism, because one of the problems of capitalism is we all commodify each other. Everybody becomes a commodity that we try to extract the most value from, and we try to separate, we try to alienate them from their labor. That's what capitalism is. And I think that we need to really take a step back as to what it is that we're doing and how serious it is. I noticed that one of the other participants is Bill Terra. Hi, Bill. Nice to see you. Bill has created something called the Human Ecology Project, where he sort of addresses all of these things about the violence that is involved in everyday life, and how we need to take a step back from that and realize what it's doing. And the children who are being born now, look, I'll be dead, and but there are children being born now. You'll be dead, I'll be dead. But the children who are being born now, what is the world going to be like when they're our age? And the answer is, it's pretty scary when you think about it. It's very scary when you think about it. And so I think we really do need to realize the importance of ahimsa, and as I say, I just wish, I've met there are very few non-Indian people who are Jain, very few. There are very few. And why is that? It's because you have to go look. It's not like Buddhism, where in America, every third person is a Buddhist or whatever. It's not like that. Jains are relatively keep to themselves sort of thing. And I think that, although that's commendable that they don't want to proselytize, it's also sad, because, as I said, ahimsa is the most important concept that human beings have ever devised. And I think that we need, ahimsa is the only solution. It's the only solution to the problems that we are facing, which, if we don't do something about those problems soon, we will destroy the world.
Thank you, Dr. Gary.
Please, Jayu Bhai, you can allow to verify.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's only 12:22. I'm happy. I'll go as long as you want. I'm a vegan.
Okay.
I have endless energy.
Thank you, Mr. Franklin. My name is Jain, and I'm an ex-president of South Florida Hindu Temple. Hindu Jain Center.
Yes.
My question is just a statement. I want to make sure that you can tell that we have about 12 years ago, when we invited Chitrabhanu, and we had publicly committed that we will never use milk in our puja. And we are very happy to announce that to you, to tell you that we have never used for last 12 years or 14 years during the very first day of the Pratishtha, the milk, the honey in the puja, and water also, because those are the requirements in doing the puja. So I just wanted to let you know that, and we should be working more towards that area. Now I talked to during our social lunch time. I said we should talk about the vegan, and then we should not we should educate our member about bringing them the sweets, barfi, penda. These are the things, and varak. These are the things we should definitely able to control. Also, at the same time, we should also educate our Jain family within a circle, a social circle also. So these are I'm taking a lot of point. I'm taking a lot of point from you, and we will discuss definitely in our meeting if I can do.
I'm delighted to hear you say that, and I'm sure that Chitrabhanu. I was very close to Chitrabhanu. I loved him very much, and he was a wonderful man, and I always felt very bad that he died without there ever being a Jaina convention, because he was one of the people who founded Jaina, and that there was never a Jaina convention that was vegan. And one of the reasons why I offered to buy all of those vegan products was because I knew Chitrabhanu was ill, and I knew he wasn't going to live much longer. And I begged my Jain friends to please, let's have this conference vegan, both because it's the right thing to do and because this may be Chitrabanu's last conference.
Right.
But you know, but I agree with you. I'm glad that you did that. And I wish that what I don't, you know, the going back to one of the comments I made before about not judging individuals, many of the Jains that I know who have said no to me are some of the sweetest, most lovely people I've ever known, in terms of being really, really nice, good people. But they become immovable when I say to them, you know, because I was thinking about a conversation I had with the head of a large jade center. And I said, please, can this be vegan? Can this event be? And they said, well, no, because people will be offended if you impose it on them. And I said, but wait a minute, you're imposing vegetarianism on them. Well, they don't want to eat meat. I said, well, that's fine. But why? I mean, you're not showing pornography at the convention. There's all sorts of things that you're not doing because they're wrong things to do. And I just think that it becomes this use of anikanvad. It has been absolutely a disaster, because then people say, well, I can do what I want because anikanvad, you can't make a judgment. And the answer is, we're Jains. We are obligated to make a judgment about action. What we're not obligated to do, and what we're obligated not to do, is to judge the individual. But I agree with you completely, and I'm delighted.
I want to make one comment. Please. I'm from Los Angeles, and I was a president of a Jain center here in Los Angeles, one of the biggest Jain center. 3 years ago, we became a completely vegan center. And in our center, any function that is done, only the vegan food is served. It's been for 3 years, including into the temple activity. And I'm very glad to hear, Gary, your offer. The last convention that we had in Jaina, I made them to force a vegan option, if not completely vegan. And pretty soon, next 1, 2, or 3 convention, it will be a completely vegan convention when you will be invited and you will have an option to pay for it if you want.
You know, let me ask you, is the temple in Los Angeles, because I heard it was only for 1 year and then they were going back to.
No, since 3 years ago, when I was a president, it became a vegan. This year, there is a new president. There is a movement that might happen. It hasn't happened yet. And it is being debated, and we will do everything we can to keep it vegan.
Okay, well, because I had heard it was moving in a non-vegan, that they were going back to non-vegan.
It hasn't happened yet, and we hope that it will never happen.
And you know what I do every year for the Jain convention? Every year, even when I was there, when I was at the Jain convention, I would not eat. And now what I do is every year, during the Jain convention, I water fast for the 4 days. I just fast, because just to sort of make my statement that a conference, getting a group of people together to talk about nonviolence, where there is violence being served, that there's something wrong with that, and that we need to take a step back from that and say, what are we doing? And so I fast every year now. Every year I fast for the 4 days. But,
thank you, Dr. Carey. To keep the time constraint, I would like to call Deepak Jain. Go ahead, Professor Deepak Jain.
No. Let me first thank Gary for really an enlightening talk. And let me tell you, when it comes to the word violence, I consider it as a matter of degree. It's not 0-1. Even having ill thoughts about others,
I agree,
is a great violence. You may be the most vegan person in the world, but if you have jealousy of someone, there is no less bad about that. So overall, as a practicing Jain, I am not a vegan. I try to minimize whatever I can do. I am not a fan of eating cheese and others, but I don't claim to be a vegan. My point to all the people that I have dealt with, that if you look at Jains, the 3 principles, one, of course, non-violence, ahimsa, the other anekant, and the third is the non-possessiveness of parigraha. And I have a doctoral student working with me right now who is using the concept of anekant, how anekant can help in conflict resolution. Because as a management school professor, we all deal with multiple conflicts. Sometimes we become very dogmatic. This concept of anekant is to look at the full picture, listen to all the arguments. And as you said that, and I agree with you, that judging action and judging human beings are two different concepts. The man's actions, you can say, I don't agree with this, but we don't know the human being in total to say the human being is wrong or right or so. Same thing when it comes to possessiveness. I have always believed that people who are secured, they can delegate power. Insecure people are also very possessive in sense of being a micromanager. And micromanagement to me is a manifestation of mistrust. I always tell people competencies can be outsourced, trust cannot be outsourced. So having this confidence and dealing with people, you have to understand also human psychology, how people think, how people act. And as leaders, I've been deans and presidents of university, my think is at the end of the day, you have to have a moral consciousness. You have a moral compass in yourself and try to act morally or in a non-violent way as much as possible. And this happens over time. I cannot force someone that this is bad or this is good. So anekant, and whether it is, and you articulated it very well in your speech, that when we look at all aspects of Jainism, at the end, the most important thing is the moral consciousness that we have. Reasoning may have flaw, but consciousness doesn't have. And so when we use the word rational, and you are absolutely right that when I look at Jain religion, it's a scientific aspect to it. There is a rational argument, whether it is rational knowledge, perception, conduct, and others. We as human beings or we as leaders, when I was the dean of Northwestern University, I cannot stop non-vegetarian food in the campus. But what I did was I increased more vegetarian options. So people get to know there are so many other good food to do that. I cannot eliminate, I cannot say I'm a Jain, so no meat would be served on the campus. But there were so many other options, vegan options, that people started thinking about, oh, I never knew that there are so many other things. So I always put in a scale from 0 to 100 and how we'd like people to see there are other ways of living a good life. And one thing that I have always tried to believe is to think well of others, because purity of thoughts, lack of jealousy also to me are forms of violence that we encounter sometimes without knowing it about it or others.
Deepak,
so yes.
I just want to say, I agree, but let me just say this. First of all, I think himsa is any departure from vitaraga. Anytime you are in a non-vitaraga state, you are in a himsic state because your soul is vibrating. So I agree with you. It's not just a question of veganism. It's a question of being in the non-vitaraga state. So I agree with that. However, Jain Dharma, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, does make a distinction. Obviously, mental himsa is bad. If I'm thinking bad thoughts about you, or I'm thinking about, buying more things because I want, etc. But when combining the mental himsa with the physical himsa of imposing harm is considered to be the worst form of himsa. And the one that generates the most amount of negative karma when one actually engages in violent actions towards another. Obviously, violent thoughts are not good. They attract bad karma. But bad thoughts combined with bad actions. So when I say, ooh, I really am hungry, I want that hamburger, I've got mental himsa, I've got the physical himsa of eating the meat. That is actually worse. And all I'm saying, Deepak, is that, you can't lead a perfect life, but just like we've drawn the line and said that Well, there's a lot of gray areas, but one of the black, there's gray areas, but one of the really clear areas is meat. All I'm suggesting to you.
Please unmute your microphone. Please mute your microphones, please. Please.
All I'm suggesting is that there's really no way logically to draw a morally coherent distinction between meat and dairy. So Deepak, I ask you, please think about going vegan. Think about it, Deepak, please.
Yes, no. And I listen to you. See, the only thing in life we have is influence.
Yeah.
Many people get advice, few benefit from it. No. I'm serious, and it's not that I cannot do it, and it may happen one day as we all mature over time. We like to do that part, and I can tell you the only one drop of milk that I take in the whole day is a drop of milk in a cup of tea. I don't drink milk, no ghee, nothing, because that I don't have any taste for that, and I may become a vegan. But vegan to me is something that I'm on a journey. Let's put it this way. And it may happen. I talk to my children and they all understand. We should be, as you said, role models. My way of life is become a role model and let people follow whether they believe in you, they trust you and trust your actions and others. But again, just to respect time, I tell you, Jainism, as I always think, is a wonderful for bringing peace, harmony in this world. If we follow the Jain values, let's not use the word Jain religion, if you follow the Jain values, these are all basically making great human beings. And I say, if I have to think as a marketing professor of branding Jainism, we need to think of Jain essence and global significance.
I agree.
When people ask me, Deepak, what is your brand? I say that I am on a journey from success to significance. I have been successful. Now the question is how we make a difference in the lives of the people whom we come across. And I am the first person to talk about Jain values that I have grown with, what my parents taught me, what my teachers taught me. So I completely agree with you that yes, looking at you, you become a role model for us, a person who didn't grow up in a Jain family and have so deep knowledge. When I was listening to your talk of Nyadvad, Anekantvad, how deep you have gone, this to me is an inspiration. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I wish more such Jain scholars would come and enlighten this world. And we all will feel very blessed that, yes, we have made a difference.
I thank you. Thank you so much. And all I can say to you is, I finished an absolutely delicious cup of chai tea with soy milk, and it was delicious. I wish you were here and I could make it for you. You'd love it.
And somebody asked a question about almond milk and soy milk. There are many variations out there. Yeah. So I don't need to have the real milk to do that part. I completely agree with you, and it may happen. After listening to you today, while you were speaking, my wife was sitting here and I told her that we need to move towards the vegan thing. And I'm quite convinced.
Excellent.
No. And she told me that from today, she's not going to wear a silk sari.
Good.
When I said that when you make you are boiling the worms to get the silk out, she was just listening to your talk and she said that let's not get into the silk sari. At least, as you remember the story that a person was throwing the fish back and he says, how can you made a life in one person. So when people ask me this question, Professor, you talk about global significance. The world is so big. How can I make a difference? I have a saying, to the world, you may be a person, but to a person, you can be the world.
Exactly. What a wonderful thing.
And this is to me the essence of Jainism. To a person, you can become the world. And if I can make a difference in one person, I feel blessed that I have achieved one step towards Vitrag.
Exactly.
The first step.
Exactly right. Exactly.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Deepak. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would like to call upon Dr. Chaitanya Pragyaji.
Yes. Samniji?
Samniji, can you unmute your microphone?
Yes. Okay. So many thanks to Professor Gary for very much enlightened talk. It is really very impactful, and you have seen that at once in reply to your lecture, So many people are committed that they want to follow veganism in their day-to-day life, in their family, in religious rituals. So that is great impact of your talk on the audience. And you have rightly said that the Anikant principle is actually evolved to dissolve the metaphysical problems. But people have extended this principle to religious pluralism and also the ethical issues. And you have rightly indicated, if we apply to this principle to such kind of issues, then it may lead to the collapse of the whole system. So we have to be very much clear that every principle has some limitations. Nothing can be universal in that sense.
Well, thank you.
Every principle has some limitations, and we have to be aware of the limitation of all the principles, whether it is the principle of non-violence, whether it is the principle of non-absolutism, or whether it is principle of non-possession. So far as the question of the violence, which is very related to our day-to-day life and how we can escape from it or how we can abstain from it. And Dr. Kirti Jain was asking about the question that when we say that we are not absolutely free from violence, or in our day-to-day life, we have to do something which is required and may involve some kind of violence. And is there any instructions in Jain scriptures that our life is more important than others? So I would like to say that Lord Mahavira never said that it is our life is important than others, but he said that it is our weakness that we cannot avoid all kinds of violence. We cannot be completely sage or ascetic. We cannot live a life of complete violence, non-violence. So that is our weakness. But it doesn't mean that our life is more important than others. We have no right to kill any living being. And try to minimize violence. As Professor Gary has said, that we can minimize, to which extent we can minimize. That is the rational, decision of all Jain people, if they think about it. So that we have to do. The social living beings cannot be completely non-violent because of his relations, because of his needs, because of his activities. So just we have to think how much we can minimize. So minimal violence, or that is ideal for the householders. We never justify war. We never justify any kind of violence, which may be essential in our day-to-day life, but all are our weakness. We are committing violence, and thereby we are committing sins. So that is never acceptable religiously. But socially, we have some bounds, and that's why we are doing that kind of thing. And this is the main reason that most of the monks and nuns, whenever they give any sermons, any preachings, they try to teach people that how far they can minimize their violence. So there are certain types of vows, simple vows in Jainism, and everybody knows about 14 vows, which have been taken every day to minimize day-to-day violence. Those violences which are essential part of our life can be minimized to certain extent. So these are things which we have to understand, that violence should not be the part of our life. It is not the ideal, it is not the goal, it is never accepted in Jainism. So that is a very great thing. We have to think of it, and it may be our weakness, but we can always think about minimizing the violence in our day-to-day life. And one thing Professor Gary has indicated, that we should not be involved in direct violence. So that's why Jains are prohibited to do 15 types of business in which there is direct violence. How you can be free from this direct involvement of violence, even you are in business. So these are the things that which we can see from the scriptures, and we can get the message that not explicitly or nor implicitly there is any kind of sanction of violence in our life from religious point of view. So we have to understand the limitations of everything. Yeah, because of being social being, we may have to do some things, and we are doing. That doesn't mean that that is the religiously true or right thing which we have to do. And we should not try to extend the limit in that sense, that since this thing, there are certain things which are coming right now at present, that there is a vegan meat, there is a meat which is not plant-based. So that kind of ideas are popping up, and we are getting what we say involved in that kind of thinking. But Jains should think of always that anything which may not be completely meat product, even though if it is given the name of meat, then it creates such kind of impressions of or thoughts in your mind that you are eating something which is meat, though it may not be originally meat. So that thoughts also affect your consciousness. So thoughts are also very important. Thinking is also very important. So what kind of thinking we have to develop? What kind of practice we have to do, follow? So these things are important from non-violence point of view. And so these all ideas are very practical, which Professor Gary has said to us. And this is the time when we have to apply our rationale to all these kind of great ideas which we have learned from Jain scriptures and from the concept of non-violence. And he has rightly said that ahimsa, the concept of ahimsa, is really very profound idea, very new thing, which Mahavir and the whole Jain tradition has taught from centuries. And it is our duty, especially of Jain community, that they should not be self-centered only. They should propagate this great idea to the whole world by practicing in their own life and also through education. So these are very important things. We have to think of it. And this lecture series has gone from last 9 months. We have organized 9 lectures of different scientists, scholars of East and West. And we have found that all have discussed Jainism in the light of science and has shown that it is very important to think of Jainism in new light, especially in the light of science and also in the light of the problems which are emerging in the world today and we are facing. So we are thankful to all the speakers who have been invited in this series. Professor Gary is the last speaker, and with the talk of enlightened talk of Gary, this series is being completed today. So we are very much thankful to Professor Gary for accepting my invitation, though he was not feeling good when I sent invitation, but later on he responded and have come for this particular talk. So he has shown very good ideas through his speech, and they are very practical, they are very rational, and we people should think that something we may practice from centuries, and they may be in our traditions acceptable, but if we are finding that there is some kind of violence, so we should try to avoid those things. They may be traditionally accepted, but rationally they cannot be accepted. So we are not just only following the tradition blindly, but we have always follow this tradition with some rationality and that is needed this time. And we will try to think of many more things and revive our traditions, which are wrong, and we have to avoid those things and try to follow what is rational and true and the non-violent. So with these ideas, I'm very much thankful to Professor Gary and all other speakers, and also the organizers who are involved, especially Florida International University Religious Department is completely involved in this lecture series. Jain Education Research Foundation is completely involved, and Jain Center of South Florida is completely involved. So I'm very much thankful to all the organizers, all the presidents, and all the technological instructors who are working behind Dr. Pragnesh Jain and Dr. Deep, who is convening all these 9 lectures from last 9 months. So I'm very much thankful to all the directors of JERF, JCRF, and FIU for conducting this wonderful lecture series. And we have got a lot of ideas from all the speakers, which are really, really very applicable and very rational and very scientific and according to the Jain doctrines and principles. So thanks to all again for coming in the lecture series and listening to all the speakers.
May I just say to Samniji, is it okay?
Yes.
Say to Samniji. First of all, I want to thank you for inviting me, but I also want to thank you and all the Samnijis for teaching Praksha meditation. It was it was probably one of the best experiences I've ever had in my entire life, was taking the course on Praksha meditation. It's a wonderful, wonderful system.
Wonderful, yes.
I loved it. Number one. Number two, I agree with you completely on the things that you said. And in terms of when you talk about eating the meat, the plant-based meat, I don't eat any of that because unlike most Jains, I was not born vegetarian. So I ate meat until I was in my mid-20s and I became a vegan. And so I don't ever want to be reminded of the fact that I ate flesh. And so the idea of eating something that is mimicking flesh makes me actually sick. So I stay away from that because I agree with you. Mental himself is very, very problematic. It's not as bad as mental and physical himsa, but it's bad. And one of the things you said that I thought was great is that simple things that we can do. That's what I'm saying. Most Jains are vegetarian. So they're already, much of my life, Samniji, I'm talking to people who eat meat. So I've got to move them. I've got to sort of convince them that they've got to stop the meat and the dairy and the eggs and whatever. Jains don't eat meat. Most of them do not eat eggs. They may eat eggs which are in cakes or stuff, but they don't eat eggs as a food. And most of them don't eat meat. So it's just a question of when you get up in the morning and you make the chai, isn't it better to put the soy in rather than the cow's milk? And it's the simple things. And I think Jains can get there so easily. But thank you so much for everything. And thank you for all of the gifts that you and the other Samnijis bring to the Western world.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gary. Thank you, Shamiji. And keeping time constrained and with the YouTube timings, I would like to call Sapanji in order to give vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Deepji. So, Vandami Samniji, all the dignitaries and all the attendees here. My name is Sapan Bafna. I'm the co-chair of Jain Education and Research Foundation. So, first of all, Dr. Gary, thanks for an informative, passionate, and energetic session today. I've not seen so much discussion, so it was a great way to end the lecture series. It is also my honor and privilege now to give a vote of thanks to all those who have made this lecture series possible. We could not be here without the generous support of our donors and volunteers. So I really want to thank them first and foremost. It has been 10 years since Jain Education Research Foundation was established, and we created the platform at Florida International University. So really, for our partners at FIU, their support and kindness really is very overwhelming. This small things have really got us to this point where we are hosting such fruitful sessions. Also, Samniji thanked many people, but I just want to extend more thanks to them. Bharti Ben, the Jain Center president for the Miami Center, Pragnesh Bhai, and many other directors there. We are very grateful for all the support, logistics, technical, and just your attendance. Just means a lot. A big applause to our EC president, Mrs. Deep Surana. She has worked tirelessly, coordinated all these sessions so smoothly that it seemed effortless, when we all know so much goes into all the planning behind the scenes. So thanks very much for that. Samniji, Vandami again to you, and for all the catalyst, the spiritual energy you provided. Did not seem like 9 months have passed, and we had 9 excellent speakers. It was such an amalgamation of East and West together to bring the pulse of Jainism. And with all of this, so many great questions, and Deepak ji and others bringing in that wisdom, that one small thing is sort of added in these sessions, which makes it so much better. So really, I want to thank each and everyone who has made this a great success. Samniji, we request you to continue the series in some way, shape, or form. I think Zoom is a great platform for sessions like this, and we just need to continue. Whatever is the attendance, I think this is a movement. It will carry on, and I think it will benefit many of us. So thank you, and have a great weekend.
Thank you. Thank you, Sapanji. And I would call Bharti Ben if she would like to speak something regarding her.
Just 1 minute. I want to take 1 minute. That from next time, this lecture series is now being over here. This was the last lecture in the series. But next time, we are planning to organize some discussion on non-violence. How non-violence can apply in our day-to-day life, and how the issues which are coming before mankind can be dissolved by following non-violence. So the next discussions would start on non-violence in 2 months, especially. So we are planning like that. Professor Gary is again invited for that talk on non-violence. So this is the futuristic plan for this particular program, that how next series will go on.
Thank you. Bharti Ben, the president of JCCF.